and welcome to episode 80 of the Impulso podcast by Momentum Works.
So Sabrina is going away for a month of holiday in Volcano Land.
Iceland.
Okay, so she asked me to practice how to say, I don't
Hello,
know.
everyone.
Hello everyone. So I'm going to give a little bit of try. Bem-vindo ao podcast Impulso, o melhor podcast da Ásia.
Yes, but when I'm gone, you have to do this in English.
Yeah, which I said, okay, welcome to Impulso Podcast, the best podcast in Asia. That's in Portuguese. Why?
Because on today's episode, we're going to be talking about Temu's recent entry into Brazil. So I think, was it last week? Last week.
Last week?
Last week, 5th June.
Yes,
Last week.
Yeah.
So on
Too much work
yes.
these few weeks. Yeah.
5th June, Temu entered Brazil, which also means that Temu is now operating in 70 countries globally.
So the preparations for Brazil launch have been going on for a while, and we know a number of sellers who are working with them on that, and a number of service providers. And initially people were saying that, okay, launching in Brazil has been very challenging because there are lots of rules, there are lots of tax issues connecting the system, etc., etc. So many people sort of believed that they would be delayed until I think mid of May, and somebody was telling me that, okay, Temu is going to launch on the 31st of May. But still, I was delayed for a few days. I guess there are lots of technicalities they need to figure out. So, as usual,
we do have a short article where Jangan wrote down a couple of his thoughts on Temu's launch in Brazil. But today we decided for
why is it
today's
English?
podcast.
Why is the English? Oh, you chose the English option.
Yeah, because it was from I have to read it.
Okay,
yes.
okay.
But see, this here shows that it's available in Brazil.
In Brazil. You have all the discounts, and so you can buy, what is that? The charger?
It's a phone stand for your car.
For 7 reais.
I need one actually.
Oh, it's quite cheap.
Yeah.
Sold 29,000 over, is that Brazil number or like global number?
No, I think this is global numbers.
Yeah, wow, okay. Still.
Yeah, a lot.
So they must have negotiated very good discount with the seller.
So yes, like I mentioned, Jangan has written an article about this, which will be linked in our show notes or the comments below. And of course, it seems like everyone is going to Brazil.
This is the comment from one of the largest cross-border logistic providers in China, based out of Shenzhen and somewhere eastern China as well. We visited them last November, and he said, for 2024, look at Brazil, because everybody's going to Brazil. And I was telling him that I thought everybody was going to Mexico. He said, next year, Brazil. Everyone, because they are the logistic provider, everyone goes to them to say that, okay, I need to plan my logistic capabilities for next year. So everyone's going to Brazil. And of course, all the platforms are there. Who is there?
The platforms have been there for a while, right? So Shopee is in Brazil. They entered in about 2020. And of course, I think they are also pretty focused on developing their own infrastructure and logistics there. So according to their latest earnings call, Shopee Express delivers about 70% of Shopee's orders in Brazil.
Yeah, I was told that they have more than 1 million parcels a day in Brazil.
Brazil.
Yeah, so which means that the logistic operations is actually fairly sizable now.
SHEIN is also in Brazil. They also entered in 2022, so 2 years after Shopee.
Yeah, they have a physical store, right?
Yes,
somewhere
in Brazil.
Yeah.
Is it a pop-up store or a permanent store?
I don't know. Even if it's permanent, the purpose is to show people how it is, right? The major fulfillment is still done in online, right? So there's another thing SHEIN did in Brazil, which we didn't mention in the slides, is that they hired this former SoftBank executive, Marcelo Claure, as their president for LATAM. So that guy was with SoftBank for a long time. And then afterwards, he took over WeWork to try to turn it around. Then, for whatever reason, he didn't. I think he fell out with Yoshi-san or some of Yoshi-san's tenants. Then he left. SoftBank gave him a lot of money to run a Latin American fund. Then he joined. I'm not sure whether full-time or part-time. SHEIN, and he said he's building a supply chain for SHEIN in Latin America, which I think it's a very interesting task, but it's also a very challenging task because we know the Latin American fashion retailers source their goods from Asia. So there's a reason why they don't source from Brazil, which we're not going to in this podcast. Yeah.
Yes. And of course, AliExpress is also in Brazil. They entered much earlier
is that rabbit?
Compared to I don't know why the rabbit is there. I don't think it's the AliExpress. mascot.
I don't know. So this is the video you can find on YouTube. Like there's like a rabbit talking
Yes.
about how you get things, and I think the words means that the quality doesn't necessarily mean expensive, right? Yeah.
And AliExpress entered in about 2013, so
Many years ago.
much earlier than most of the other platforms. And of course, J&T also entered in 2022.
I have a friend from JNT who has just been sent to Brazil, and he just went like that. So, oh, my boss asked me to go to Brazil. There I go. Actually, a bit about AliExpress, if you can go back a little bit. It was 2017 or 2018. A friend of mine from Brazil was visiting me in Asia, and he has an e-commerce background, and he was telling me that everybody in Brazil back then called AliExpress Ali Surprise.
Because you wouldn't know what you would get.
I mean, no, you place the order, but you don't know when you will get it. I mean, you place the order in January, you might get it before Christmas or after Christmas.
I thought like the quality wouldn't be guaranteed.
Yeah, but I spoke with some of the earlier guys from AliExpress in charge of Brazil market. They complain about the logistics because AliExpress was a platform, right? And they said one cultural shock they had in Brazil when they first went there is the post office of Brazil. They used the post office to deliver, and they said, during the holidays, no matter how much we pay them, they just refuse to work. This is very different from what we see in China. You just pay people enough, they will work.
They want to enjoy their holidays, yeah. Cultural differences.
Cultural differences, yeah.
So, yes, J&T is also in...
You know who that is, right?
Messi.
Yeah, Lionel Messi.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So
He's the ambassador for a lot of things.
Yes, and
he's also the ambassador for Coty.
Coty, yes. He was also, I mean, I think the whole Argentina team is ambassador for Coty.
Yeah.
And Messi was also ambassador for WeChat when WeChat tried to go international in 2013, 2014. And if you compare that note, you will notice that Messi has aged quite a lot over the last 10 years, which is natural.
And of course, this means that most of the platforms in this Southeast Asia, or at least China in this region, have actually ventured into Brazil, including Temu now, which just launched last week.
The only exception is?
TikTok Shop.
Okay.
Do you know if TikTok Shop has plans? I know they are very focused on US now.
Yeah.
Despite the...
I do have lots of friends in Brazil, and there have been like 2 times that they were about to launch in Brazil. Then they said, okay, no, we want to focus on US. And both instances is, okay, we want to launch in Brazil. I have aligned all the agencies, like influencers and stuff. Then, okay, order from headquarters, we need to focus resources on the US. So I think now with what's happening in the US, they are trying to make TikTok Shop more relevant so that it probably becomes much harder to ban them next year.
And I think it's just a matter of time, right? Because look at their competitors like Temu, SHEIN. They went into the US as well. And once they made enough there, then they started expanding into other countries. So once TikTok figures a way to...
That's not always the case, right? Because AliExpress never went to the US that big. And I know Shopee.
Focus on Europe.
Shopee thought about going to the US, and without too much study, they said, okay, Amazon's too strong. Let's not challenge them. But of course, I mean,
Temu did.
Temu thinks differently. Do you know who that person is?
No.
So when people look at TikTok, they think about a TikTok CEO show, right?
Mr. Chu.
Yes, this guy is called John Lidong, co-founder of TikTok. Co-founder of ByteDance. He's the real decision maker of all the commercialization efforts of ByteDance. So he's the one making the decisions.
So he's the one deciding.
Yes, he was the one who did the Tokopedia deal, which there's layoff going on. We can talk about that in a later episode.
We also have a podcast on that, which will be linked in the show notes below if you guys are curious.
You remember all the podcasts, or you don't have AI in your mind?
I remember all the podcasts that I filmed at least. So we mentioned it seems like everyone is going to Brazil, but why Brazil? Why do you think Latin America is a pretty popular market now as well, right?
Yeah.
Similar to Southeast Asia. I think when people look at these 2 markets, they kind of compare them against each other. They have their similarities and their differences as well, right? But why Brazil specifically?
We actually specifically published a report benchmarking Latin America and Southeast Asia back in 2022. So there are lots of similarities, right? I mean, each region would have 6 major countries. And each region, I think the total population is kind of similar. Yeah, Latin America there's another similarity. They are all influenced by a super big neighbor on the north. like US to North Latin America, China to the north of Southeast Asia. So you get lots of influence because of the gravity of that large market or large supply. But specifically about Brazil, so it's the largest market in Latin America, and compared to the largest market in Southeast Asia, which is Indonesia, Brazil is smaller in population. The economy-wise is more or less similar, and of course we attracted most of the VC funding in Latin America, so it's a big market. And I do think, maybe it's not politically correct to say that historically, I think Latin America modeled a lot of their policies and after Europe. But in terms of economic development, they are not, I mean, aside from maybe Argentina and Chile at some point of time, the whole of Latin America is not as developed as Europe. So there's a bit of a sort of mismatch structurally. A friend of mine has recently been to Mexico and Brazil. So what she realizes is that, I mean, she's an e-commerce expert, right, operator. In terms of availability in these two markets, you have on the one hand the branded goods, like the premium and stuff, middle class and above, shopping malls, very nice. On the other hand, you have lots of very, very cheap goods from China. So people in the middle, for quality goods, there isn't much option. Quality, branded, mass market goods. So they see lots of opportunity. But of course, operating in those markets are not easy.
It's very challenging. Because, I mean, there are similarities, but they're also all quite different. And of course, specifically, Brazil itself has its challenges, right?
Yes.
So, this is the cover of The Economist. In November 2009. It says, Brazil takes off. And in September 2013, has Brazil blown it?
2013. And I was actually in São Paulo during the election of 2014. It was very interesting. I think 2009 was when Dilma Rousseff became the president, and 2014 she was re-elected. And I remember when I was in São Paulo, I had quite a number of friends who flew back to São Paulo specifically to vote against Dilma Rousseff. And I can remember their face, how they got disappointed the day after. And of course, that year there was also another, like, even bigger disappointment, which is they lost to Germany 1-7 in the World Cup. That cost all my Brazilian colleagues off work for 2 weeks.
Alright, yeah, they had to all take leave.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it's a large, proud nation with lots of resources, with a rich history, and with a very, very vibrant culture. And of course, people have high expectations, and it has its own industry, right? You think about, did Singapore Airlines just or Scoot just bought, like, in the Brazilian planes for some of the regional routes? So basically, Brazil has a full industry. But of course, the past decade has been disappointing. If you look at the GDP per capita.
This is around 2011, right? The peak.
Yeah, so 2019, if you look at The Economist, it says it's take off.
It was taking off.
It was taking off, and it was actually, I mean, this is probably the financial crisis. And after the financial crisis, and people had high expectations about Brazil's recovery and all this middle class in Latin America. Up until like 2012, whatever, then there's some policies from Dilma Rousseff's government which caused confidence to dip. And then it dipped further and further. Then they elected someone far right, like Jair Bolsonaro. And that unfortunately coincided with COVID.
But we see it's kind of going up a little bit.
Yeah, so Lula is back in power, and of course he was in prison because of some corruption scandal, and people had high expectations about him because, I don't know, I mean, I like Brazil, I like the people there. I just hope that they can, I mean, from an economic point of view, they can get their act together.
We'll see in
Brazil.
Yeah, we will see.
Yeah.
And of course, I mean, we are talking a lot about these cross-border companies, right? And something that's been happening is that Brazil recently passed a new legislation imposing a 20% additional tax on cross-border e-commerce parcels below $50 in value. And this is on top of the 17% ICMS tax
which is like
already
VAT
charged.
or GST, right?
Which is like a goods and service tax, essentially.
Yeah.
So this was what you were mentioning just now when we were talking about Temu's entry into Brazil.
So that essentially puts the effective tax to about 40% or a little bit more than 40%. And of course, I mean, Temu probably has done the calculation that, okay, with this tax, it's still worthwhile for their time. Maybe they have also calculated that this market is big enough. And, when Shopee went to Brazil like 2 years ago, the local marketplaces what's the one? Mercado Libre, etc., they were charging the sellers 16% commission. 16%. So everyone would calculate that, okay, I mean, this is a market which is very good, and some people has been making a lot of profit, and more efficient players should be able to disrupt. But of course, there are political forces behind it, right? So many people have been lobbying against the cross-border players. So on the top is this gentleman called Jorge Cunha, and he's a senator. He's been proposing the tax bills, and there have been some changes, but it was passed. And now it's on the desk of the president, Lula da Silva. So if he signs it, it becomes law, and people need to comply. And that means another set of system integration, so that you can report tax without having your goods stuck at customs.
Yes, because I mean it's not just a problem that's Brazil specific, right? We see a lot of other countries are also trying to clamp down on all these cross-border commerce.
I spoke with lots of cross-border logistic players and sellers in Shenzhen. They find most complicated Brazil and South Africa. So both have introduced new taxes, and both often have goods rejected or stuck at customs.
Which brings us very nicely to our next point, is that...
Which also means that many of them have not been to Egypt. I mean, I've dealt with Egyptian customs. That's another animal.
Maybe they haven't seen it enough yet.
Yeah.
Which brings us to our next point of Temu's recent challenges in US customs as well. So like we mentioned, not just Brazil, right? Even the US is also trying to tighten down on its cross-border commerce.
There was this thing that happened end of May when we were in Hangzhou, and which scared a lot of people, right? I mean, plane loads of Temu goods were stuck at customs because I think the US Customs and Border Protection Agency suddenly stopped clearance of suddenly stopped clearance of about 15 custom clearance agents, and one of the bigger ones, SECO, actually issued a notice to its customers saying that, okay, this is unexpected and we have been very compliant, we want to do something about it. And I think Temu also responded very fast. They issued a notice to their suppliers within a few hours saying that, look, this is not, we have investigated, this is because of some compliance issues of voluntary submission of the clearance agents. I think somebody said ketamine or whatever was found in some of the parcels, not Temu parcels. And that resulted in extra strict checks and stuff, and lots of goods were stuck. But I think the team, so that night, we got the news 4 or 5 hours before the market opened, and when the market opened and Temu, the Pinduoduo's share price was going up, half an hour later it nosedived. More people learned about the news. But I think afterwards they managed to slowly clear some of the goods, and it seems that it's just a small glitch to them. But it highlights some of the risks that they're facing running the cross-border business.
Which could be why in US they are currently Temu has been using a full consignment model, right? And then they've recently announced, was it earlier this year? Last year? March. Earlier this year, right?
Allowed people to,
that they are trying to shift towards they are trying out a half consignment model in the US.
Yeah, so people would be sending, sellers who have the goods already in the US would be sending directly from US warehouses. And I think from 2 weeks ago, they have massively reduced the ad spend on full consignment or full management, and that they have focused a lot of attention on people who already have the goods in US. I think in a way it's also trying to convince the sellers in China to have their goods already available in the US. Because that's a risk,
inventory risk.
Yeah, to take more inventory risk.
So I think it's interesting because we've been to China a couple times this year for a couple of immersions, right? And we've had sharing by people who do cross-border. And it's very interesting because what they've shared is that obviously it's very different from what they know in China, depending on the US, wherever they're going, even the Middle East. It's just all the fulfillment and all, it's very different. So then it's like learning to operate a whole new
That's why every time I speak to a successful cross-border player in Shenzhen about, hey, what do you think about Southeast Asia? The answer is usually, I don't have time for that.
I can't think about it.
I don't have time for that. Yeah.
Temu doesn't really think of Southeast Asia either. So Temu is only in Malaysia and Philippines in Southeast Asia, which they entered last year. And they're not focusing much on it, right? But of course,
they have not spent much on it, yeah.
There are also rumors of Temu entering Indonesia. So this is from e-commerce. I think we've mentioned them a couple of times in previous platforms. They are an Instagram page that has a lot of the latest tech gossip on tech e-commerce in Southeast Asia, right? Yeah. And they posted this in May. Pretty recently.
So Temu rumored to enter Indonesia in 2024. So I also heard from multiple sources that Temu had been speaking to service providers in Indonesia about, payment, logistics and stuff. I don't know exactly how they're going to, if the plan is going to go into Indonesia, I don't know exactly how they're going to do that because cross-border will not work. The whole Indonesian, political setup is so much against cross-border, but essentially the goods still came from China, so it's just in a way benefiting the sort of distributors, sellers, whatever in Indonesia. So in a case that cross-border is not working, how exactly are they, if they were to start, how exactly are they going to start it, and how exactly that will be a focus for them? I don't know. I think they're probably in a process of assessment as well. They probably don't have a concrete plan yet. But for that kind of company, they're very data-driven. Even if they have a plan, they can change.
Yes, and also, they're testing out a new model now after how many years? So maybe it's something they want to implement. But then again, we talk about not just Temu, but Pinduoduo a lot, right? As an organization, they are very, very efficient. You look at their GMV compared to their head count. And like you said, they make very data-driven decisions. So when they decide to enter Indonesia, do you think they'll focus a lot on it though? Or do you think it'll just be like Malaysia and Philippines, kind of a touch and go, we launch in this country?
I think lots of people are trying to find a definite answer that whether they will do this, whether they will not do that. But I do think that a lot of the decisions they make are dynamic. So they definitely want to make themselves, make Temu a success globally. But how is that going to make up in different markets and especially in some of the bigger markets? What will be their strategy? I think that's dynamic. But one thing for sure they mentioned about in their latest earnings call is that they're going to focus a lot on compliance, which means, they started, people have lots of complaints about them, but they want to be I wouldn't say like a good player, but a compliant player.
So they don't get banned.
Yeah. At the same time, let's see, we should do immersion to Brazil.
Yes, I want to go to Brazil.
You haven't been?
No.
Oh, okay.
It's too far a flight. Yes, but I think
Yes,
it's
very far.
interesting to look at Brazil as well. So I think that brings us to the end of today's episode of the Impulso podcast. If you guys are interested in more insights on Temu, we do have a report called Who is Temu, which will be linked in the show notes or comments below. And of course, on our blog, The Lowdown, we also have a series of articles. Temu is one of the companies that we analyze quite closely. And I think we should do a deep dive into Pinduoduo and Temu one day.
We'll do that once we have time.
Yes.
So many projects. And Sabrina thinks that doing the podcast is a break for her from work.
Yes, it's a good break. So thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of the Impulso podcast. We hope that you guys enjoyed today's episode. If you did, do like our podcast and subscribe to us on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, or your preferred podcast platform to stay up to date on the latest happenings and trends in tech, new retail, and the broader digital economy.
Adios.
Thank you. Bye-bye.